everybody. Welcome back to the Liz Show. I'm your host, Liz, and I'm really excited about this show. I know I say it every time because all these shows are great. Let's be honest, step families are a thing. More and more blended families are happening every day. In fact, the Step Family Foundation says that on average, 1,300 new step families are forming each year. And 50% of the 60 million children under age 13 in the United States of America are currently living with one biological parent and that parent's current partner. And today we specifically are going to talk about stepmoms, not just about being a stepmom, about being an empowered stepmom. And today I am so excited to invite Tanisha O onto the show to talk about how to become an empowered stepmom. Tanisha, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Liz. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So what is an empowered stepmom?
An empowered stepmom is a stepmother who has decided, you can also be a biological mother and a stepmother, but a mother who has decided to own who she is and create her own identity, create her own footsteps in the sand so that we're not voiceless and falling behind and having to do what other people feel we should do by not answering or just being quiet and kind of having a pity party. You know, I feel like since the beginning of time, well before the Disney story of Cinderella came about, you know, we just have always been portrayed as wicked and evil and just bitter. And we've kind of just fallen into that role, unfortunately, instead of just owning who we are as people. And we're people, we're mothers. You know, Mother's Day will come, and as a stepmother, because you didn't give birth to a child, it's kind of looked at as, it doesn't count. That doesn't count so much, but it does count. These are children that we, in some cases, they're on our medical insurance. We're taking care of. We're raising them 100%, giving them all of our values, giving them all of our love and affection. And yet we're discounted because we didn't give birth to them. So I just found it when I entered into the blended family world, I said, you know what, there's a secret society that, I don't like. And so I'm going to create my own way of doing things. And I felt so empowered after we went through our journey. And of course, it's still happening today, that I was like, I want to start a movement so that stepmothers can also know that they too can be empowered throughout this journey. The kids may never like you. The ex may never accept you, but do you love you? And you having the courage to just be empowered to do what you want to do, the world is your oyster. Yeah.
Well, and I agree with you. Disney and all these stories say they're wicked. And then we kind of move to this transition of, oh, just be the aunt.
Mm-hmm.
Just stay in the background. Don't say anything. Don't have an opinion. Let's be realistic. These children and the man that you love, they're in your world. They make decisions that affect you. And so what's your response to that when people say, no, you're supposed to be the aunt?
Yeah. I am not an aunt. I do believe, actually, in my book, Empowered Stepmother, I talk about that aunt role. So when I'm an aunt, I have nieces and nephews, and my role, as much as I love them, is to love them and give them back to their mother, you know, like buy them everything. And so when we assume the role as an aunt or a babysitter, I've heard the babysitter role, treat them like they're your best friend's kids. You lose the opportunity to build a connection with them, a special bond with them as a mother and a child. You know, a lot of times we have barriers that we've built up that we don't even realize we've set up. And it's not even necessarily our rules. That's the thing. It's society's rules on the boundaries. You know what? Because you didn't give birth, you're not allowed to love them but so much. And let me just take a moment to introduce myself and my story, just so people understand.
Yeah, please do.
Why is this lady even qualified to have this conversation with us? So yeah, it's those little things. So I have two biological children who are now 23 and 22. I was a teenage mother, and then I married my husband. And at the time we met, my stepson, you won't hear me say stepson except for right now, because we don't use the word step in our home. We're just a family. We are committed to just loving our children. So he's my youngest son. So when you hear me say youngest son, I am referring to my baby boy I didn't give birth to. Anyway, he was 1.5 when we met. And so we dated for almost 4 years before we were married. I never really met my youngest son's biological mom. Other than seeing her a couple times at a soccer match, my husband and her were never married and they never dated. So it wasn't an ex-wife or ex-relationship. They were just someone who had a couple casual encounters in a bedroom and it resulted in pregnancy. This is in my book.
Don't really matter too. I mean, regardless of the relationship extent, you're still, that person's still going to be in each other's life regardless.
It does, but it actually, I found, Liz, it kind of does make a difference, because when you have people who don't know each other very much outside of a couple bedroom encounters, now you're two people, you don't even understand each other's personalities. And now you're coming together to parent.
It's even more complicated.
Exactly. At least if you're married, a little background, you know each other a lot more, your standards and your
marriage where you didn't really actually know each other.
Exactly. which happens also. But I think it's important to speak to those relationships where you don't know each other, or maybe you think you know it. You really don't know each other until you have children. That's when you really get to learn what your rules are and what you like and don't like. And so in our case, that was a situation. And so they were kind of trying to figure each other out. So what we did in our relationship was, after all the bickering and all the court battles and all of those things, I shared that because I don't want anybody to think I'm painting a picture of just some beautiful wonderland. It was not. But what was happening is she was constantly calling my husband and all the text messages, and we know those things. And then my husband and I are kind of getting into these disagreements over these things. So we decided to come together to set very clear boundaries for how we would engage with Danielle. And that's my youngest son's mother's name. And we set the tone for our household. And in doing so, we then decided how we would engage with her, because ultimately we can't control her. We couldn't control what she was going to do or not do, but we could only control how we responded. So we changed things. And in our rules of engagement, we decided I was going to be the point of contact. She was no longer going to be able to contact and communicate with my husband, because I wasn't comfortable with another woman yelling and cussing and fussing at my husband.
So how did you make that happen?
Well, a couple things. One, who she communicated with wasn't up to her to decide for us. As a couple, it's very important for you to establish your rules of engagement and your boundaries. And if you're unable to discuss something of this magnitude before you're married, then you want to look at other areas that you're going to encounter these issues in as well. So that's
more if there's one.
Absolutely. So the decision that we made wasn't up for her to decide whether she liked it or she didn't like it. It was our decision to decide what peace and harmony we wanted to create in our home. Mm-hmm. We saw how much it was impacting our children, all of this constant arguing and bickering. And so we as a couple decided this is how we're going to do. I had to have a talk with my husband to say, love, I'm just not comfortable with this. This isn't working for me. And let's try something else. We've already tried it this way for years. And this is where we are. So let's try something different. And we were both so desperate for something different that we were willing to be wrong in order to figure out what was right. And I think that that's part of it. But we have to find what works for us. And so it wasn't up for negotiation, Liz. That's how it worked. It was basically, we told her, my husband told her in a message, moving forward, all communication will go through my wife. If you elect not to speak to my wife, then we won't be communicating. I need you to go through my wife. Now, what I'm not adding is during this time, we were going through a custody battle, and ultimately my husband did gain custody of my son, our youngest son. So I'm not a stepmother who just has this beautiful soul who visits on the weekends. He lives in my home, which changes the total dynamic of how we interact, And so although it was tough in that moment, you probably would agree, most times we don't want to ever go through uncomfortable moments. But if you think about the uncomfortable moments in our lives, many times they brought joy on the other side. It's just we're too afraid to go through that moment. And so my husband and I were willing to go through that uncomfortable moment and phase to see if we were right, and we were.
And I'm sure so many people are thinking like, well, my mother would be like, well, I have a right to talk to my grandchildren's mother, so I'm going to talk to them no matter what. Or, you know.
And they're right.
So then kind of give your advice on how you would handle with a grandmother or even an ex-wife who just would not respect the boundaries. Then what do you do? Especially in a case where it's a weekend shifting or where it might be more complicated. How do you say these are the boundaries, you're going to respect them when they're not respecting?
So one, we have to know what the boundaries are. That's number one. Set those boundaries and be clear with your partner on what those boundaries are. Two, the reality is we can't control what other people do. We can't control it. So we only get to decide what we're willing to engage in and not engage in. For me, I've set the boundaries, and maybe at some point I've explained the why behind the decision that we've made. But after that, I'm finished talking about it. It's not up for negotiation. I did not call you to ask for your opinion. And so I think that part of that is us being strong enough to own who we are, to know what's best for us and our family. Because if we don't,
on it too, say no, this is
correct.
People are like, this is what I want, and then they allow themselves to be bulldozed down, or okay, that person's getting frustrated, and I mean this respectfully, but some men are too weak to deal with it.
I agree. No, and that's not a wrong thing. You know, men love their mothers and they love their wives, and I'm grateful. I'm actually glad you said that, Liz, because I'm grateful that I have a husband who has the strongest backbone. You know, when Danielle would come and we had meetings with her parents, because my husband was like, maybe your parents can help you become better at doing this parenting thing, co-parenting thing. But when they would say, she's just a stepmom, she needs to mind her business and stay in her lane. I've heard it all, Liz. You know what my husband told him? He said, listen, she's my wife, and you will respect her for the position that I've placed her in my family. It takes a village to raise a child, and she's part of this village. And that was period.
Said that because what I've noticed, I'm a product of a blended family. My dad died when I was a little girl, and then my mom got remarried. And it was very divided. And that's what I noticed with a lot of these blended families is these are mine, these are yours. You don't get to make decisions. I don't get to make decisions. And it's confusion for the children. And I see that in relationships too. It's just, if this is going to be your wife and this is going to be your husband and it's going to be a stepmom or a stepdad, they have to have some authority in their lives. Do I think that they beat your children? No, I'm not saying that. But there is a level of, you're not going to treat my husband that way, or you're not going to treat my wife that way. But so that's when you start to see the glue unravel. And I read a statistic studying all this that 75% of women who married a man with a child would never do it again. And I'm going to assume that it's because men probably waver a lot under pressure with, I don't know how to maneuver this, versus what you're saying is you've got to fully integrate. You've got to fully come together.
Correct.
You cannot be double-minded in it.
You can't. And I can see one of the things that I talk about in detail in this blended family secret society that you enter into is, think about something, Liz. When people are married for the second or third time, how do they introduce their husband? They just say, this is my husband, Bill. They don't say, this is my third husband, Bill. But sit on that for a second. Why don't we introduce our third or fifth wife as our fifth wife? Because it's uncomfortable. It makes them not feel as precious or important because they weren't the first ones. They weren't chosen first or whatever. But when we have children and we have stepchildren, we automatically say, this is my stepson, and oh, this is my daughter. And we've automatically formed an alliance. Yes, this separation, and they can no longer align as siblings and just love each other. In many blended families, people want to pretend like they're replacing someone. And so when a child says something like, you're not my dad, you know, it may sting and you get offended. But I can agree. You know, when Ike said that to me, I was like, you're right. I'm not your mom, but you're still in my home and you will respect the boundaries of this home. And so with the older kids, the way we were able to establish some of the things is my husband built a relationship with them independent of me. It wasn't a relationship just because I'm married to your mom, so you're required to listen to me. So we did little subtle things. Like when the kids wanted to go somewhere, they weren't allowed to just ask me and then tell him, well, my mom said I can do it, so I'm doing it. No, 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 no. The way it worked was, you can ask me and I'll give you my thoughts on it, but you have to talk to dad as well and get his thoughts, and then together. And if both don't say yes, then whoever said no, that's what sticks.
And that's how you would do it if it was your biological children.
Correct.
And
Correct.
So it's so simple, and yet people aren't doing it.
Yeah.
Another thing that people kind of, it's like said but truly unsaid, is there's lots of shame with stepkids sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you come from different classes, or you know, you wouldn't raise your children that way, so you're almost ashamed of those children, or you know, don't want to be like,
you're judging. Yeah, you're judging them.
Yeah,
you're judging them.
You're afraid other people are going to judge you because of how they act. I see that a lot with
absolutely
people.
One of the things that I've been taught, and I'm a firm believer in, is whatever it is that we see that is positive in another person, it's because we see that beauty within ourselves. And many times we're happy to embrace that. But the same applies to when we see negative things in other people. We see something in us that is mirroring that. And so if we find shame or embarrassment in whatever the children are doing based on what someone else says, that's because we're really embarrassed also. My youngest son is not perfect, and neither are the other two. They're just not, you know what I mean? But I don't get to just say, oh, you're doing that because I didn't give birth to you, because I have two older ones that like to show off from time to time as well. You know, it's their kids. It's what they do. And so I think that when we own who we are, the question that I would ask someone is, are you 100% confident with your blended family?
I also read that when people are divorced, children usually get less discipline in that situation.
Yes.
And what I've noticed, especially if you are if the child is a product of constantly going from house to house, or I'm just with my father for the weekend, or I'm just with my mom for the weekend, that parent doesn't want to discipline. And then that step parent ends up having to do all the discipline.
Correct.
So shed some light.
I'm in that. I'm in that right now.
Oh, well, perfect.
Yeah, I'm in that right now. So because we have custody of Ike, we were noticing there is a really distinct difference in how he behaves when he comes back home. So I do a lot of leadership training, as do our children. Like we all have gone through a lot of leadership training, and it's good because we're able to communicate on the same level. And I just said that to you so that as I'm talking to you about the way I communicate with Ike, I don't want anyone who hasn't seen any of our videos, because we do a lot of videos, to think, is this lady serious? Is she talking to an 11-year-old? Yes, I am. And he comprehends absolutely everything that we say.
You should talk to a child at your level and not at a child. Like people who baby their children, I'm like, you're stunting the growth, guys. You're stunting it. Stop
exactly. It. They're more intelligent than we give them credit for. And so I was noticing my baby boy, every time he came back, I'm like, love, what is going on? Why are you not getting this? You know, why do you continue to make decisions that are not helping you? And so I asked him recently, I said, what part of you is afraid to succeed? Why are you so committed to failure? Why? Yeah. And he really thought about it. And because I said, why are you so different when you're at Danielle's house, at mommy's house, than you are at home? And do you know what he told me? Because this is something that parents don't realize kids actually know. He said, Mom, I'm different because she rewards me for the bad behavior. When I'm good, she just says, good job. But when I misbehave, she actually asks me more questions. She's more involved. She pays more attention. She follows up. And so he's hungry for that attention. And in that, he's willing to get in trouble in order to get that attention.
But like the back of your book says something that stopped me in my tracks, that if you get anxious when you hear the ex's name. And let's be honest, I mean, you're far from it now, but there's probably been a moment in your life where, maybe not with your husband, but you heard an ex's name.
Oh, her name.
Yeah,
her name.
You know,
Yes.
everybody deals with that. I mean,
Yes.
like, I wish you never met her or him. I like, you're
Yes.
such a moron for, you know, we say these
Yes.
terrible things in our head if we want to admit it or not. Like,
I've said them out loud. I've said them. I'll be transparent enough to say it. I've said it out loud. But you know what it was? It goes back to what I was sharing earlier. And in the book, I literally share my journey of healing. So finding my balance in my role of stepmom, but I'm raising this child. But you know what? I had to begin to look for all the things that we had in common. Because let's just face it, even in your current situation, you probably look at more of what you wouldn't do because we're judging. I would never do that. I would never do that. We don't know what we would do or not do. Some things we know for sure, but not all of them. But remember, we all come with a different baggage of life. And we don't know, right? Baggage of life is your perspective because it's your life experiences. And we don't know how anyone's baggage of life is packed, truly. Most of us don't even understand how our own baggage of life is packed, let alone trying to understand someone else's. And so when I decided to be responsible for my behavior and I decided to own who I was and love me, I was able to see all the beauty in Danielle and see her beautiful smile and look for all the great things in her. As I began to grow, that's when our relationship grew because she began to see, you know what? She's not just judging me. She actually does genuinely care.
well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I really
You're welcome.
I hope you guys enjoyed and then learned how to blend your blended family to have a winning family, because that's what it's about. You've got to win together. Yes. Enjoy and have a great day, everybody.